Hi and welcome to Film 3.uk Movie Recap. Today, we will be reviewing the movie Schindler's List 1993, so if you're a fan of the film or just curious about it, stick around. In our video reviews, we may include some spoilers, so please be careful if you haven't seen the movie yet. In the first part of the film, the audience is introduced to Oskar Schindler, a Nazi party member and businessman who owns a factory in Krakow. Schindler is shown to be a womanizer and is not well liked by his employees, but he is nonetheless respected for his business acumen. One day, Nazi official Gruppenführer Amon Goth arrives in Krakow and takes over the Jewish ghetto that has been established there, where Schindler's factory is located. Goth immediately begins persecuting the Jews, requiring them to wear armbands with the Star of David and depriving them of food and water. He also begins selecting Jews for deportation to the Auschwitz concentration camp. One day, Schindler witnesses a group of Jewish workers being marched to their deaths by Goth and is horrified. He thereafter begins to look out for the welfare of his Jewish employees, providing them with extra food and shelter. When the ghetto is liquidated and the Jews are set to be deported to Auschwitz, Schindler manages to convince Goth to let him keep a group of Jewish workers to continue working in his factory. The film begins in 1939 with the German occupation of Poland. Oskar Schindler, a successful businessman, arrives in the city of Krakow to set up a new factory. He soon meets Itzhak Stern, a Jewish accountant who helps him to find a suitable site. Schindler is initially hostile to the Jews, but Stern's persistent efforts persuade him to employ Jews in his factory. The Jews in the ghetto are subjected to increasing hardships and brutality. In 1942, the ghetto is liquidated and the residents are deported to the Plazzo concentration camp. Schindler visits the camp and is appalled by the conditions there. When the camp commandant, Amon Goeth, kills a prisoner in cold blood, Schindler intervened and manages to get him removed from the camp. Meanwhile, the Jews in the camp are put to work in a new factory Schindler has set up. When the order comes for all the remaining Jews in the camp to be sent to Auschwitz, Schindler manages to get them transferred to his own factory. He then starts making efforts to save as many Jews as possible from the Nazis. The film ends with the liberation of the Jews by the Allies in 1945. Schindler's list of Jews he has saved is shown, along with the statement that he is credited with saving the lives of more than 1,000 Jews. In the third part of the film, the Nazis have begun liquidating the ghetto in Krakow and sending the Jews to concentration camps. Schindler manages to save a group of his Jewish workers from being sent to the camps, but they are forced to work in his factory under terrible conditions. One day, a group of SS soldiers comes to the factory and takes away a group of workers, including a young boy named Ovidel. Schindler manages to save Ovidel from being sent to a concentration camp, but the boy is traumatized by the experience. In the fourth part of the film, the Jews in the ghetto are being slowly starved to death. They are given very little food, and no one is allowed to leave. The conditions are deplorable, and people are dying every day. One day, the SS come in and take all of the able-bodied men, women, and children to a nearby factory. They say that they will be working there, but the Jews know that they are going to be killed. The fifth part of the film Schindler's List 1993 follows the same general storyline as the rest of the film. Oskar Schindler is a businessman who starts off running a factory in Poland. When the Nazis invade, he begins employing Jews in his factory and protecting them from the Nazis. Eventually, he is able to save more than 1,000 Jews from concentration camps and death. In the sixth part of the film, the Nazis begin to lose the war and are forced to retreat from Poland. This causes the Jews in the concentration camps to be liberated by the Allies. However, before they are freed, the Nazis force the Jews to walk to another concentration camp in order to prevent them from being liberated. Many Jews die during the journey. In the seventh part of the film, the Nazis begin to close in on the Jews in the ghetto, and Oskar Schindler realizes that he needs to do something to save them. He manages to get them all jobs in his factory, and they are able to stay there until the end of the war. The eighth part of the film Schindler's List begins with Oskar Schindler waking up in his bed in the morning. He is then shown walking around his factory, which has been bombed by the Allies. He then enters his office to find it in disarray. He looks out the window to see a group of Jews being marched to a train. He is then shown going to his car and driving to the ghetto. He is stopped by a guard and is told that he cannot enter. Schindler then gets out of his car and walks to the ghetto. He shows his identification to the guard and is allowed in. He is then shown walking through the ghetto and coming to a stop at a fence. He looks through the fence and sees a group of Jews being loaded into a train. He is then shown walking back to his car and driving away. The ninth part of the film Schindler's List begins with Oskar Schindler observing as the SS force the Jews in his factory to clean up the Nazi party offices. However, a resistance member tells Schindler that the SS are planning to arrive soon to liquidate the ghetto. Schindler manages to convince the SS officer to let him take the Jews in his factory to a work camp instead. On the way there, the SS officers shoot at the Jews, killing many. When they arrive at the work camp, the Jews are put to work in a factory. However, the conditions are horrendous and many of the Jews die from exhaustion. One day, a group of Jews are attacked and out to be executed. Schindler manages to convince the SS officer in charge to let him have the Jews in his factory. In return, Schindler agrees to give the officer money and a car. In the 10th part of the film, the Nazis begin to suspect that Schindler was hiding Jews in his factory. They raid the factory and find several Jews hiding there. They are about to arrest Schindler when one of the Nazis recognizes him from a previous encounter. The Nazi official decides to let Schindler go, but warns him that he will be watching him closely.